Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Let me start with macro thoughts. And Hugh, if President Trump believes China is crumbling and Beijing will eventually make decisive concessions, he has to wait until Ivanka becomes the president to sign a trade deal with China. Chinese economy continues to grow with strong consumption. People are optimistic. And I take you back to an article I wrote on the 26th of August, and I called it China Strikes at Trump. And it would be a mistake to assume China does not have levers to strike back, primarily the currency, and they can wobble the stock market very, very easily, notwithstanding the volume of tweets President Trump produces on the same matter. To wit, pips are, I feel like I'm playing musical chairs and China has control of the music, and that's a very valid point. I wrote about the financial markets and I call them a bot world with bots trading with each other. There is clearly a convergence, I said, with computational propaganda. The University of Oxford's Computational Propaganda Research Project produced a piece that spoke of the use of algorithms, automation, and big data to shape public life is becoming a pervasive and ubiquitous part of everyday life. I then jumped to Cambridge Analytica's now infamous Andrew Nix, who said we put information into the bloodstream of the internet and then watch it grow, give it a little push every now and again over time to watch it take shape. And so the stuff infiltrates the online community and expands, but with no branding, so it's unattributable, untraceable. So the candidate is the puppet, the undercover reporter asked, always replied Nix. One day he's going to tweet about the stock market and it's going to puke 5%. That's Chi-girl. And then I take you back, feedback loop, practically every day now and for over a year, Trump recycles the same headline. The latest iteration, that was around November 11, Trump says China trade talks moving very nicely, claiming Beijing wants to deal more than the US. And that is what Northman Trader said, recycle the same headline over and over again, and each time the markets jump and each time it means nothing. You know why algos buy unsubstantiated headlines? Because they're stupid, he tweeted. So in many respects, the candidate that Nix was referring to is the stock market, and it is a puppet for now, but then one day it won't be. Goldman Sachs Financial Conditions Index back to last September 2018 levels with DMARC sequential today. Things might start to get tighter from here. Tommy Thornton, who's extremely interesting. Home Thoughts, T.S. Eliot, Mr. Kurtz, he dead. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. A place of wonders beyond imagining, Zion NPS celebrates its 100th birthday today, pick courtesy of John Weatherby of Utah. China signs defense agreement with South Korea as US angers Seoul with demand for $5 billion troop payment, Yahoo News. This is, geopolitically speaking, quite extraordinary. Iran unrest raises a question: is maximum pressure working? Anti-government protests in Iran have left buses and banks burned, hundreds under arrest, the internet blocked, and an unconfirmed number of people dead. That raises the question of whether Trump administration's maximum pressure campaign is starting to deliver. But there was ready tinder to be lit, consisting of the sorts of frustrations that have stoked violence around the globe in recent months, from Bolivia, Chile and Venezuela to Hong Kong, Iraq and Lebanon. The culmination of rising anger at what is perceived to be a corrupt, out-of-touch ruling class that has consistently failed to deliver on the economy or jobs amid allegations of billions of dollars of corruption. That was Afshin Molavi. On Sunday, a spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry blamed the protests on US-backed saboteurs. And really, following Twitter, and I don't know whether it's just the fact that I am following them, but it seems most of the communication is coming out of that Mariam lady, MEK, Pompeo. They're all Pompeo proxies. So I was curious as to see what really is it manufactured to some degree. I suspect it is. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei said that all the centers of the world's wickedness against us were cheering at the scenes of violence. The system still has the will to survive and a fearsome capacity to quell opposition. I have serious doubts as to whether this will produce the outcomes that the Trump administration wants. That's Valles. The US has been ambiguous about whether the ultimate goal of its policy is to force regime change or a shift in Iran's behavior. Currently, it supports Hezbollah and Hamas against Israel, supplies militias in Iraq, Syria and Yemen, and pursues uranium enrichment and ballistic missile capabilities. But that sheer crescent that's being described there is under quite some pressure. Crude oil exports, on which Iran relies for much of its hard currency earnings, have fallen to about 250,000 barrels per day, from a peak of 2.5 million barrels per day in April last year. That has made unaffordable the $69 billion that, according to the Paris-based International Energy Agency, Iran spent on energy subsidies in 2018. The International Monetary Fund has forecast a 9.5% contraction for Iran this year, amid 36% inflation that's eating away at incomes. A recent study by the London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies detailed the extraordinary success Iran has had in extending its regional influence by enlisting Shiite militias from Afghanistan to Iraq to help fight for its interests against much better armed and resourced opponents, and they are outstanding proponents of asymmetric warfare. This is a photograph of protesters in the northern city of Sari, Iran on November the 16th. This is a photo of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in Tehran on November 17th. 13th of May this year, I said Iran is at the Hunter S. Thompsonian edge. There is no honest way to explain it, because the only people who really know where it is are the ones who have gone over. But I said if the US thinks Tehran will just roll over, which appears to be the case, then they're exhibiting the same deluded ideas that they exhibited a day before the Peacock Throne got plucked. But Iran is a geopolitical bleeding edge, and there's been a significant ratcheting up of pressure. Iran's only crime is we decided not to fold. Javad Zarif, Asia Times Online, Pepe Escobar. Zarif inevitably had to evoke Mike Pompeo. Today, the Secretary of State of the United States says publicly if Iran wants to eat, it has to obey the United States. Trump has been a big proponent, as I wrote previously, of coercive, financial and sanction warfare, and its expression vis-à-vis Iran is its apogee. There was a brief attempt to trend reverse under Barack Obama. That was in October 2013, and I said then the recent rapprochement between President Obama and Iran's Hassan Rouhani has certainly snapped a losing sequence in US-Iran relations that goes all the way back to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, when Ayatollah Khamenei overthrew Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran, whose son is also quite active on Twitter. Here you see a demonstrator carrying the national flag as riot police officers guard during the ongoing anti-government protest in Beirut, Lebanon. 21st of October, I was writing about the WhatsApp revolution in Lebanon. I was quoting Paul Virilio: "The revolutionary contingent attains its ideal form not in the place of production but in the street, where for a moment it stops being a cog in the technical machine and itself becomes a motor machine of attack, in other words, a producer of speed." The revolutionaries are trying to blockade Parliament to prevent the masquerades, ignoring the rightful demands of the revolution. They represent the nation, not the so-called deputies. That's Abu Jaja. As I said in my article in October, the phenomenon is spreading like wildfire, in large part because of the tinder-dry conditions underfoot. I also said prolonged standoffs eviscerate economies. Hong Kong is in a recession, reducing opportunities and accelerate the negative feedback loop. Antonio Gramsci wrote, "The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. Now is the time of monsters." This is a revolution and it is a global phenomenon. 10th of June, I was quoting Lenin: "There are decades when nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen." The zeitgeist of a time is its defining spirit or its mood. Capturing the zeitgeist of the now is not an easy thing because we're living in a dizzyingly fluid moment. Hugh Masekela: "I want to be there when the people start to turn it around." Let's move to currency markets. Euro dollar 110.69, dollar index 97.887, Japanese yen 108.46. Swiss franc 0.9901, the pound 129.12. I was watching the impeachment hearings, did not listen to the debate, but apparently it was 49.51% or thereabouts. The Australian dollar 0.6816, India rupee 71.6905, South Korean won 1169.735, the Rial, which looks very soft, 4.1929, Egyptian pound 1610, that must be the high for the year, South African rand 14.7748, still in that 1450, 1550 range in which it's been for a considerable time. Dollar index 97.887. I feel it's going to soften, but we'll have to keep an eye on things. We're in a very volatile trade war moment, I feel, and I think the trade war, I for one don't think it's going to get resolved, and I think that phase one is not even going to happen. Euro dollar, this is a chart from FX Pip Titan, 110.67. He's expecting the euro to soften. My article over the weekend was about the Lotus Eaters and the UK election, and I was quoting the Lotus Eaters from Tennyson. "Courage," he said, and pointed toward the land. "This mounting wave will roll us shoreward soon." I've eaten a Caesar salad and had a couple of cups of tea and read a bit and talked a bit to my team. It's been very pleasant, said the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn about his preparations ahead of the first TV debate, according to BBC Politics. Hong Kong Shanghai Bank says the British pound may soar or crash. The outcome of Britain's election next month poses a binary choice for the nation's currency, according to the UK's largest bank. Nothing is priced in, said David Bloom. The political outcome will determine the future of the currency. So Brexit, an election result that paves the way to a UK-European Union deal on Brexit could send the pound up to 145 by the end of next year. or a no-deal Brexit would see it tumble to 110 from just below 130 now. Any resolution is good. Among three election scenarios, a hung parliament where neither Boris Johnson nor Jeremy Corbyn gets a majority would be the worst for the currency, he said. In that case, there would be no majority of lawmakers in favour of a fresh referendum on Brexit, nor favouring any specific Brexit deal. We could be back in the mud and lost in the wilderness. While polls suggest a Conservative majority now, the voting scenarios for December the 12th are complex, according to Bloom. It's still completely open. Anything can happen. Sterling, this is a chart from FX Pip Titan again, 129.13. Apple and Microsoft have done most of the heavy lifting this year. They have attributed 38% of the gain, while the next 15 attributes combined were 38% of the gain. Tommy Thornton. Custom Apple Microsoft index as a cluster of DMARC countdown 13's exhaustion signals now. Streaming dreams, Netflix. I was quoting that article I read, Annals of Technology. People went from broad to narrow, and we think they will continue to go that way, spend more and more time in the niches, because now the distribution landscape allows for more narrowness. I put out a buy notice at $270 on Netflix. We're above $300 now. FBI is investigating Epstein death as a criminal matter. Zero hedge. He, of course, had a collection of eyeballs on his wall. The eyeballs make sense because Epstein was a watcher. Is it a coincidence that we all live in a watch and collect digital economy? Maybe, but we feast upon each other in the 21st century. He was, in the words of the New York Times, not closely monitored. Jeffrey Epstein was a spy in a society of spies. He was a collector in a collector's economy. He was a watcher, and he died while nobody was watching. Commodity markets, gold beginning to firm, 1477 last. Oil back to the trend line, it keeps bouncing off it. Will it ever break? That's Raoul, $55.30, massive downside move yesterday. And I think the reason is that MBS is now, the Aramco deal is purely a domestic affair. Had it been an international one, I think the Saudis would have supported the price up to $60, but there's no need or purpose now. Sub-Saharan Africa on Wednesday, Awal's Sidama people will vote in a referendum on whether to form their own self-governing region in southern Ethiopia. The question of Sidama's statehood has been ongoing for more than 130 years. It is an issue for which our forefathers made heavy sacrifices. If the referendum passes, the Sidama, Ethiopia's fifth largest ethnic group, who make up around 4% of the country's 105 million population, will gain control over local taxes, education, security and laws. The vote is being closely watched by other ethnic groups from among more than 80 that make up Ethiopia. More than a dozen other groups are considering demanding similar votes. And this is the problem. You've got these forces which are trying to pull Ethiopia apart. And that, I think, is the single biggest challenge for the Prime Minister and Nobel Prize winner and soon-to-be purchaser of nuclear-tipped weapons from France, apparently. In push for Africa, Russia's Wagner mercenaries are out of their depth in Mozambique, Moscow Times. When John Gartner, a former Rhodesian soldier, who now heads the military security company OAM, was approached by a Mozambican official to help fight the Islamist insurgency in the country's north, he thought he was about to win a lucrative contract. We presented them with a first-class proposal in early August. We have so much experience in operating in Mozambique and know the tough environment very well. Trust me, we would have done an excellent job, he said. Likewise, Dolph Dorfling submitted a strong proposal for a country he knows like the palm of his hand. They both lost out to a new player in town, the Kremlin-linked Wagner group. This is under Yevgeny Prigozhin, otherwise known as Putin's chef. While the veteran mercenaries admitted they couldn't match Wagner's low costs and high-level political connections, they cast doubt on the Russian company's ability to operate in Mozambique because they say it knows neither the terrain nor the politics. Look, it's money and politics. It was clear we couldn't compete with Wagner. But now they're in trouble there, they're out of their depth. In September, about 200 Russian Wagner mercenaries arrived in Mozambique's capital, Maputo, which has the most flavoursome tiger prawns I've ever tasted. First reported by the Times of London and independently confirmed by the Moscow Times. Gartner said he had proposed to bring around 50 highly qualified experts to Mozambique at a cost of between $15,000 and $25,000 per person per month. Wagner soldiers received between 120,000 and 200,000 rubles per month. That's between $1,800 and $3,100. Prigozhin is emerging as a key figure in Russia's increasingly expansive foreign policy in Africa, and Wagner troops have been reported operating in Sudan, the Central African Republic, and Libya. They are cheap and come as part of a package of regime support services, including political technologies. A few weeks after Wagner's arrival in September, reports started coming out of Mozambique that the group's mercenaries were being ambushed, killed and beheaded in Cabo Delgado. You have to realize this is one of the toughest environments in the world, said Al Venta, a veteran South African journalist. The consensus is that Wagner has almost no experience of the kind of primitive bush warfare being waged in there. They are going to come very badly unstuck, he added. The undergrowth is so thick there that all the high-tech equipment Wagner brought ceases to be effective. The Russians arrived with drones, but they can't actually use them. Two sources in the Mozambique military, also speaking under condition of anonymity, described growing tensions between Wagner and the Mozambique Defense Armed Forces, FADM, after a number of failed military operations. The Russians don't understand the local culture, don't trust the soldiers, and have to fight in horrible conditions against an enemy that is gaining more and more momentum. They're in over their heads. He said the first bodies of Wagner soldiers who died in Mozambique have already arrived in Vladimir, a region outside Moscow, where families have been given hefty compensation in return for silence. This is a photo of Cabo Delgado, Mozambique. It is one of the poorest and least developed areas in the region. Here's a photograph of Pemba Island from the sky that I took. And after a visit in June 2012 to Maputo, when the hopes of the gas discoveries were at their peak, and then of course we had the tuna scandal, and now we're back to boom times. I wrote about Russia's intervention in Africa in an article at the end of October called From Russia with Love. I said I would argue Putin's timing is exquisite and optimal, and his model has an exponential ROI. Russia's clout on African soil runs on many tracks. Its expansion is geared primarily toward hybrid activities. In Moscow, his offer for Africa are mercenaries, military equipment, mining investments, nuclear power plants, and railway connections. Cory Biko says that Moscow invaluably fills the much-needed niche of providing its partners there with democratic securities. To simplify, Russia's political technologists have reportedly devised bespoke solutions for confronting incipient and ongoing colour revolutions. And I said Xi's fed up and speaks about the end of vanity because his ROI outside commodities and telecoms is negative. Putin has created a hybrid model with an exponential ROI. I would imagine he is on speed dial. Professor Steve Hanke. I'm currently the only source of annual inflation for Zimbabwe until February 2020. By my measure, annual inflation today is 574%, he says. And you remember they just cut rates in half to 35%. And as I've said in January, the point I'm making is that there is a correlation between high inflation and revolutionary conditions. And Zimbabwe in July was a laboratory experiment with inflation clocking 176%. Now we're at 574. The South African all shares up 8.79% year to date. Dollar rand, as I said, 14.7748. We're still in that 1550 range. Egyptian pound 16.1010. I think that's the high for the year. EGX 30 up 9.8% year to date. Nigerian all share down 14.92% year to date, but the banks have been very strong. The sector index is up 15% in November, the most since January 2018. A phenomena we saw here as well. Ghana Stock Exchange down 14.46%. Angola sold $3 billion of bonds yesterday. The 10-year tranche yielded 8%, the 30-year 9.125%. Eurobond issuance in 2019 is $24 billion. IMF's new boss voices concern about rising debt levels, worried about rising debt in Africa with about 40% of countries on the continent at distressed levels, MD Kristalina Georgieva said. In some cases we're concerned, in others we still see that investing is going to pay off over time. Debt levels in the region have risen as governments struggle to collect and grow revenue while increasing their budgets. South Africa's ratio is projected to reach 81% of GDP by 2028. Kenya recently doubled its debt ceiling to match the size of the entire economy. We do advise Kenya to be somewhat more cautious in building debt, but we've seen good macroeconomic policies in Kenya. Our program with the country, our engagement with the country by and large are just as positive. In Zambia, government debt, including publicly traded obligations, is set to increase to 92% of GDP this year and 96% in 2020. They are the canary in the coal mine. Debt on its own is not bad. It is bad when it goes for the wrong things and when it goes with a speed that the economy cannot handle. I think her prognosis is correct, and I think essentially the overwhelming trend of this big debt splurge is it's gone on the wrong things and it's gone with the speed that the economies cannot handle. In cases where debt is dangerous, take Zambia, we do say you need to really get a handle on your debt. You can say that again. In other cases like Ethiopia, we say you do need to renegotiate some of your debt. 14th of October, I touched on this. I said debt vulnerabilities remain high. The share of countries in sub-Saharan Africa assessed in debt distress at or high risk of external debt distress has almost doubled. I said it seems to me we're at a pivot moment and we can keep regurgitating the same old mantras like a stuck record, and if we do that, this turns Ozymandias. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of the colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. The end of vanity, which I characterized at the time as a substantive linguistic recasting of China-Africa by Xi Jinping. That money is not available anymore. Kenya, this is debt service ratios from Reginald Kadzutsu. He's been speaking about this for quite a while. More skilled workers are needed in morgues, but few takers, according to the Daily Nation. Kenya lacks training facilities for morticians, save from Chiromo, which has a 3-month course for mortuary attendants. Nairobi all shares up 10.64% year to date. Standard Chartered reported Q3 earnings. That's linked on rich wrap-ups. Kenya government securities down 10.67%. That's the next shoe to drop because it's inevitable, predictable and predicted that Kenya government securities are going to be downgraded. Loans and advances to customers net up 6.753%. Earnings per share was down 1.278%. The NSE 20 is down 6.88% year to date. I thank you kindly for stopping by.